Chapter 3 of The Magic Nuts by Mary Louisa Molesworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Fletcher. Chapter 3. It is Hildegard. A Pair of Friends. Wordsworth. Fraulein was right. Both driver and horses woke up wonderfully as the first straggling houses of the village came in sight. It would be impossible to describe the extraordinary sounds and ejaculations which Friedrich, as he was called, addressed to his steeds, but which they evidently quite understood. "Oh, how nice it is to go so fast, and to hear the bells jingling so," said Leonore. "I wish we had father to go." "If that were the case, we should soon sober down again," said Fraulein with a smile, adding the next moment, "and here we are. See the good aunt, my child, as I told you, standing at the gate, just as I last saw her when I left her 5 years ago. But then it was parting and tears, and now it is meeting and joy." Tears, nevertheless, were not wanting in the eyes of both the good ladies. Tears of happiness, however, which were quickly wiped away. "How well you are looking! Not a day older," said the niece. "And you, my Elsa, how well you look! A trifle stouter, perhaps, but that is an improvement. You have always been too thin, my child," said the aunt, fondly patting Fraulein's shoulders, though she had to reach up to do so. Then she moved quickly to Leonore with a little exclamation of apology. "And I have not yet welcomed our guest. Welcome to Dorf, my Fraulein, 1,000 times welcome, and may you be as happy here as the old aunt will wish to make you." Leonore had been standing by, eyeing the aunt and niece with the greatest interest. It amused her much to hear her governess spoken to as "my child," for to her Fraulein seemed quite old, long past the age of thinking how old she was. Indeed, the white-haired little lady did not seem to her much older. "Oh, thank you," she said in reply to the aunt's kind words. "I hope I shall be very happy here, but please don't call me anything but Leonore." "As you please," her new friend replied, while Fraulein smiled beamingly. She was most anxious that her aunt and her pupil should make friends, and she knew that, though Leonore was a polite and well-mannered little girl, she had likes and dislikes of her own, and not always quite reasonable ones. Perhaps, to put it shortly, she felt anxious that her charge was just a trifle spoilt, and that she herself had had a hand in the spoiling. "Oh, a motherless child," she had said to herself many and many a time in excuse during the 5 years she had had the care of Leonore, for Fraulein had gone to her when the little girl was only 4 years old. "And her papa so far away, who could be severe with her?" Not tender-hearted Fraulein Elsa, most certainly. So she felt especially delighted when Leonore replied so prettily to her aunt, and still more so when the child lifted up her face for the kiss of welcome which Aunt Anna was only too ready to bestow, though she would have been rather surprised had she known the thoughts that were in Leonore's head at the moment. "I believe she does know something about fairies," the little girl was saying to herself. "She has nice twinkly eyes, and I don't know what makes me think so, but I believe she does understand about them. Anyway, she won't be like my aunts in England, who always want me to read improving books and say that I'm getting too big for fairy stories." That first evening in the quaint old village was full of interest for Leonore. Aunt Anna's house in itself was charming to her, for though really small as to the size and number of its rooms, it did not seem so. There were such nice twisty passages and funny short flights of steps, each leading perhaps to only one room, or even to nothing more than a landing with a window. And standing at one of these, the little girl made a grand discovery, which took her flying off to the room where Fraulein was busily unpacking the boxes which the carrier had already brought. "Fraulein, Fraulein," she cried, "I've been looking out at the back of the house, and just across the yard there's a lovely sort of big courtyard and buildings round it, and I saw a man all white and powdery carrying sacks. Is there a mill here?"
"Yes, my dear," Fraulein replied. "Did I not tell you? It is a very old mill, and the same people have had it for nearly 100 years. Such nice people, too. I will take you all over it in a day or two. It will amuse you to see the different kinds of grain and flour all so neatly arranged."
"And the same people have been there for nearly 100 years!" exclaimed Leonore. "How very old they must be!"
Fraulein laughed. Though Leonore was so fond of wonders and fancies, she was sometimes very matter-of-fact. Aunt Anna, who just then joined them, smiled kindly.
"Elsa did not mean the same persons," she explained, "but the same family, the same name. Those there now, the miller himself, is the great-grandson of the man who was there first when the mill was built, which was, I think, fully more than 100 years ago," she added, turning to her niece.
Leonore looked rather disappointed.
"Oh," she said, "I thought it would be so nice to see people who were 100. Then I suppose the people here aren't any older than anywhere else." "Oh, I can scarcely say that," Aunt Anna replied. "There are some very old, and there are odd stories about a few of the aged folk. I know one or two who do not seem to have grown any older since I can remember, and my memory goes back a good way now. But, my dears, I came to tell you that supper is ready. We must not let it get cold."
She held out her hand to Leonore as she spoke. The little girl took it and went off with her very happily, Fraulein calling after them that she would follow immediately.
"Please tell me, Aunt Anna," said Leonore. It had been decided that she should thus address the old lady. "Please tell me, do you mean that some of these very old people who don't grow any older are a kind of fairy?"
She spoke almost in a whisper, but she was quite in earnest.
"Well," said Aunt Anna, "this country is on the borders of fairyland, so who can say? When we were children, I and my brothers and sisters and the little barons and baronesses up at the castle, when we all played together long ago, we used often to try to find the way there, and fairies, of course, are much cleverer than we are. I don't see why some of them may not stray into our world sometimes." "And pretend to be not fairies," said Leonore eagerly. "Perhaps they go back to fairyland every night and are here every day. Fairies don't need to go to sleep ever, do they?"
But Aunt Anna had not time to reply just then, for supper was on the table, and all her attention was given to seeing that the dishes were what they should be, and in helping her little guest to Leonore's liking. When Fraulein joined them, however, the conversation took a more general turn.
"I was speaking just now to Leonore," Aunt Anna began, "of my childhood, when your dear father, Elsie, and the others and I used to play with the castle children. And that reminds me that I have a piece of news for you. Things repeat themselves, it is said. It will be strange if a second generation—"
She said no more, and for a moment or two seemed lost in thought, the thought of the past. Fraulein was used to her aunt's ways. The old lady was a curious mixture of practical common sense and dreamy fancifulness. But after a little pause the niece recalled her to the present. "A piece of news, you said, aunt? Good news, I hope?" she inquired.
"Oh, I think so," said the aunt. "It is about the family at the castle. Little Baroness Hildegard is probably, almost certainly, coming here to spend the winter with her grandparents. She may arrive any day."
"Oh, I am pleased to hear it," said Fraulein. It was just what I was hoping might happen, but I dared scarcely think of it. It would be so nice for our dear Leonore to have a companion." Leonore pricked up her ears at this. "Yes, my dear," Fraulein went on in answer to the question in her eyes. "I have not spoken of it to you before, for there seemed so little chance of it coming to pass. It is about the little Hildegard, who would be such a delightful companion for you. She is just about your age, an only child as you are, and such a dear little girl by all accounts. I have not seen her since she was 6, but Aunt Anna knows her very well, and the family at the castle have been our most kind friends for so long." Leonore looked full of interest, but rather perplexed. "I don't quite understand," she said. "Do you mean that the little girl is perhaps coming to live here in this house with us?" "Oh, no, my dear. Her own home is a good way off, but her grandpapa and grandmamma live at the castle, a large old grey house halfway up the hill above the village. I will show it to you to-morrow. It is a wonderfully quaint old place, and the little Baroness comes sometimes on long visits to her grandparents, who love to have her. Only they fear it is lonely for her, as she is accustomed to the life of a great capital," said Aunt Anna. "They were delighted to hear I was expecting a little guest, when I saw them the other day, and they told me of the probability of Hildegard's coming." Fraulein almost clapped her hands at this. "Nothing could be more fortunate," she said. "There will be no fear now of your finding Dorf dull, my dearest Leonore." Leonore smiled back in return. It was impossible not to be touched by her kind governess's anxiety for her happiness, but she herself had had no fears about being dull or lonely at Dorf. She was not much accustomed to companions of her own age, and just a little shy of them, so the news of Hildegard's coming was not quite as welcome to her as to her friends. "I should have been quite happy without anybody else," she said to herself. "I love old Aunt Anna, and I'm sure she knows plenty of fairy stories, whether she's ever seen any fairies herself or not." Still, she felt, of course, a good deal of curiosity to see the grandchild of the castle, and could not help letting her thoughts run on her. Would she be taller or smaller than herself, dark or fair, merry or quiet? Above all, would she care for the same things? Would she love fairies and be always hoping to see one some day? There was plenty for Leonore to think about and dream about that first night in the little quaint house, was there not? And dream she did. When she woke in the morning, it seemed to her that she had been busy at it all night, though only one bit of her dreams remained in her memory. This bit was about Hildegard, and strange as it seemed, about a person she had only given a passing moment's attention to, the old dame in the market-place at Alt. She dreamt that she was walking along the village street when she heard a voice calling. She was alone, and she looked back expecting to see Fraulein. But no, a queer little figure was trotting after her, and as it came nearer, she heard that the name that reached her ears was not Leonore, but Hildegard. And with that, some queer feeling made her slip inside the shade of a gateway she was passing to watch what happened. And as the figure came quite close, she saw that it was that of the old apple-woman. And then, to her surprise, there came flying down the hill, for the village street lay closely below the rising ground at one side, a child, all dressed in white, with fair hair blowing about her face as she ran. "Here I am," she said. "What is it?" And now, glancing at the dame, Leonore saw that she was quite changed. At first, indeed, she thought she was no longer there, till some unuttered voice seemed to tell her that the figure now before her was still the same person. She had grown tall and wavy-looking, her wrinkled face was smooth and fair. Only the bright dark eyes remained, and as she held out her hand as if to welcome the pretty child, Leonore saw that in it lay 3 nuts, small and dry and brown, just like the 3 still stored in her own jacket pocket. "Take these," said a sweet low voice. "They will match hers. You will know what to do with them, and by their means you will bring her to me. We must make her happy. She has travelled far, and she has longed to cross the borderland." And Hildegard, for the same inner voice seemed to tell Leonore that Hildegard it was, took the nuts and nodded as if to say, "I understand." And with that, to her great disappointment, Leonore awoke. Awoke, however, to what goes far to take away disappointment of such a kind, for the sun was shining brightly, her simple but cosy little room seemed painted in white and pale gold, and a soft green by the window told her that the creepers had not yet faded into their winter bareness. "Oh, I wonder what o'clock it is," thought the little girl, as she gazed about her in great content. "How glad I am that it's such a fine day. I do want to go all about the village, and especially to see the castle. I wonder if Hildegard is like the little girl in my dream. Oh, I do hope she is. And how funny that I should have dreamt about the nut woman turning into a fairy. It does seem as if Hildegard must care for fairies just as I do, and as if she knew a good deal about them too. By the by, I do hope my nuts are safe. I never remembered to take them out of my jacket pocket." She was on the point of jumping up to see if they were still there, when the door opened softly and Fraulein peeped in. She was already dressed, and her face was beaming. It seemed to reflect the sunshine coming in at the window. "Oh, Fraulein dear," said Leonore, "how lazy I am. You're dressed, and I only woke up a few minutes ago." "All the better, my child," was Fraulein's kind reply. "It means, I hope, that you have slept well and soundly. My native air brings back old habits to me, you see. I was always accustomed to getting up very early here. And see what a lovely day it is. As soon as we have had breakfast, I must take you out to see the village and—" "The castle?" interrupted Leonore. "Can't we go to the castle? I do so want to know if Hildegard has come. I have been dreaming about her," she was going to say, but something, she knew not what, made her hesitate and change the words into "thinking of her so much," which was, of course, quite true. And something of the same feeling prevented her looking for the nuts till Fraulein left the room. "It is not likely that the little Baroness has already arrived," the governess replied. "We shall be sure to hear as soon as she comes. But we can see something of the castle outside at any rate. For the next few days I think it must be all holiday time," she went on, smiling. "Aunt Anna begs for it, and we have been working pretty steadily these last months." Leonore had no objection to this proposal, though she was fond of lessons, never having been overdosed with them, and she jumped out of bed and bathed and dressed in the best of spirits. The nuts were quite safe in her jacket pocket. She wrapped them in a piece of paper for better security and put them back again. "I should not like to lose them," she thought. "My dream has given me a feeling that there is something out of the common about them, and I should like to take them with me wherever I go. Just supposing I met any fairy sort of person, perhaps the nuts might turn out to be of use in some queer way." After breakfast, and when Fraulein had helped Leonore to arrange her books and work and other little things in the room that was to serve as her schoolroom during the winter, they set off on their first ramble through and round the village. It was a pretty village, lying as it did at the foot of the hills, which were beautifully wooded. It could scarcely have been ugly, but besides these natural advantages, it was bright and clean. Many of the houses, too, were pretty in themselves, with deep roofs and carved balconies, and in some cases many-coloured designs painted on the outside walls. Leonore was delighted. It was so different from any place she had ever seen before. "Oh, Fraulein," she exclaimed, "it's like a toy town. It doesn't look as if real people had built it."
"But it looks as if very real people had built that, does it not?" said Fraulein, stopping short and drawing Leonore a little backward. That was the grim old castle, of which they now had the first view, standing lonely and grey up on the heights overlooking the village, like a stern guardian keeping watch on the doings of playful children at its feet. The little girl gazed at it with all her eyes.
"It's a real castle," she exclaimed. "I am so pleased. It looks as if it had dungeons and what's the word, Fraulein?"
"Fortifications," said her governess. "You mean that it is fortified. Yes, at least it used to be in the old days. There are holes in the walls which the defenders used to shoot through in time of siege, and there are battlements still quite perfect round the front. It is so pleasant to saunter on them and think of the strange scenes the old place must have witnessed. We can walk up the hill towards the gates if you like, and you will see a little more." Leonore, of course, did like, and the nearer they got to the castle, the more was she fascinated by the view of the ancient building. Just outside the entrance they stood still, and Fraulein began pointing out to her its different parts, and giving her a little historical account of it, to which she listened with interest. Suddenly, for all was very silent just then, they heard steps approaching and a clear young voice singing softly, and Fraulein stopped talking and stood gazing before her, as did Leonore, till from among the trees which bordered the short approach to the inner gateway there appeared a childish figure running towards them, singing as she came. A young girl, dressed all in white, with fair floating hair.
"It is Hildegard," said Leonore, growing pale with excitement,
for the figure was exactly like the little girl in her dream. End of chapter 3.